The auctioneer brought the gavel down at $300 on a warm, clear May morning in 2006 at the Angelina County Estate Auction outside Lufkin, Texas, and the man in the white western-cut sport coat standing under the auction tent let out a high, dry laugh through his front teeth that turned the heads of every East Texas pulpwood mechanic and sawmill hand standing along the chain link. Sonny Pickett was 53, 6 feet tall and lean, his silver blonde hair slicked straight back from a high tanned forehead, a clean-shaven jaw, sharp pale blue eyes behind gold-rim aviator sunglasses pushed up onto his head, a deep East Texas sun-weathered face, a small gold tooth at one corner of his smile. He wore a crisp white western-cut sport coat with double rear vents over a starched pale blue Oxford shirt buttoned to the throat, dark gray wool slacks with a sharp ironed crease, polished cognac caiman skin cowboy boots stitched in black, a wide hand-tooled leather belt with a heavy nickel silver Texas state-shaped buckle, and a small enameled Lufkin Lions Club lapel pin on the left lapel of the sport coat. He had been the owner-operator of Pickett Ford-Mercury on US 59 in Lufkin for 19 years, and the estate auction had been called for an East Texas pulpwood truck contractor whose lien had cleared the previous spring. The 1949 Ford F-3 wrecker at the back of the auction list had been on the dealership's books since 1990 as a trade-in against trade contingency, and Sonny had told the auctioneer privately the dealership would have hauled the F-3 to the Diboll Wood Treaters scrapyard for the cost of the diesel. The 24-year-old shop mechanic at the back of the bidder's line in the deeply faded olive drab work coverall had just outbid Sonny for $300 against his casual $60 opening shot. And Sonny was making sure the Angelina County mechanics understood the joke. Boyd Tatum folded the auction slip into the inside pocket of his coverall and walked through the red clay gravel to the truck. The Ford F-3 was 16 feet of light medium-duty 3/4-ton pickup converted into a small home-built wrecker. The cab, painted a faded bayou green, oxidized to a chalky moss green along the body panels, and rust brown along the lower edges of the doors from 16 East Texas summers, the chrome Ford letters across the front of the hood tarnished to a dull pewter. Both small chrome cab mirrors snapped at the brackets. A hand-built single-mast wrecker boom with a small hand-cranked single-drum winch welded onto the rear of the bed, listing slightly to the right at 3 degrees with a frayed cable, the wooden bed planks rotted through, 3 of the 4 tires flat, and the word junk spray-painted in flaking pulpwood blaze orange block letters across the driver's door. A small steel pocket was visible welded to the underside of the bed crossmember between the spare tire mount and the rear axle, the weld bead hand-applied. Boyd had grown up 6 miles north of where this truck had last been parked on a small piney woods homestead outside Lufkin. His grandfather, Walker Tatum, was waiting at the trailer. Walker was 78, a retired International Paper Company pulpwood truck mechanic who had worked the Lufkin IP shops for 41 years between 1948 and his retirement in 1989, 5'9", lean and erect, with broad, bony shoulders and a slight stoop, snow-white hair clipped close under a battered straw western hat with a sweat-stained band pulled low, a thick white mustache trimmed close above a clean-shaven jaw, deep, watery hazel eyes set in an East Texas weathered face, large knotted hands. A stubby corncob pipe sat unlit between his teeth. He wore a faded indigo cotton bib overall buttoned over a faded white cotton work shirt, scuffed brown leather lace-up work boots, and a small enameled IP pulpwood leaf pin on the bib strap. Walker set one liver-spotted hand on the rusted bumper of the F-3 and stood there a long minute. He spoke quietly. He said, "Son, you bought Travis Mosley's old F-3. Travis Mosley had run Mosley East Texas Recovery out of a small board and batten shop on US 59 north of Lufkin from 1976 until the rollover, working the steep, wet pine needle grades above the Angelina River and the muddy spring pulpwood haul roads above Nacogdoches, pulling stuck IP pulpwood trucks off the back grades and overturned mill supply trucks out of the wet maize switchbacks above the river. He had built the small, hand-built, single-mast wrecker boom himself onto the F-3's rear bed in 1976, with the help of two welders from the IP Lufkin shop on a long Memorial Day weekend. He had married a Nacogdoches girl named Roselle Hadley in 1980, and they had a daughter, Carolyn, born in 1982. Travis had died in May of 1990. He had been working in IP pulpwood truck recovery on a wet landing above the Angelina River when a fully loaded IP haul truck slid back on the wet red clay grade and pinned him between the front of his own F-3 and the haul truck rear wheels. He had died at the Lufkin Memorial Hospital 3 hours later. He was 42. Caroline was 8. The F-3 had been recovered by another wrecker out of Nacogdoches and parked behind the Mosley shop on US 59. Roselle had paid the Angelina County property tax on the shop for 10 years until she remarried in 2000 and moved to Houston. The lot had been let go to the county that fall, and the inventory consigned to Pickett Ford-Mercury as a trade-in against trade contingency, and the F-3 had sat behind the Pickett dealership for 6 more years until the spring estate auction. Boyd had been at the auction because his grandfather had heard from a Diboll sawmill hand that Travis Mosley's truck was finally being sold. They winched the F-3 onto Boyd's borrowed flatbed trailer. Sonny Pickett stood under the auction tent in his white western-cut sport coat and watched, the gold-rim aviators glinting in the May sun, and as Boyd pulled out, he called across the red clay gravel that when the boy was ready to admit defeat, Pickett Ford-Mercury would haul the F-3 to the Diboll scrapyard for the cost of the diesel. Boyd did not answer. Walker climbed into the cab of the trailer truck, and they drove the 12 miles north up US 59 to Walker's tin-roof pole barn shop behind a small white frame cabin on a piney woods ridge outside Lufkin, the dead F-3 rocking behind them on the warm pavement, the small single-mast boom pointing at the soft blue East Texas sky like a bent finger. The restoration would take 18 years. Nobody knew that on the drive north. Boyd worked his day job at a heavy truck shop in Lufkin during the week and drove 15 minutes north on US 59 to Walker's pole barn every Saturday and most Sundays. They started with the bed because Walker insisted. The Ford F-3 bed planks had rotted through, and the steel cross members had taken 30 years of East Texas humidity. They cut out the rotted planks and prepared the cross members for fresh oak. They pulled the Ford 226 cubic inch flathead inline-6 gasoline engine out of the truck and tore it down on a stand. The bearings were salvageable, the crank true, the head needed a careful regrind. They pulled the 3-speed column shift manual and pressed new bushings into the shift tower. The first long East Texas summer went into the engine and into stories about Travis Mosley. Walker told Boyd about the night in 1981 when Travis pulled a stuck IP pulpwood truck out of a Bayou Loco Creek crossing at -3 degrees and refused payment except for a side of smoked Nacogdoches pork. He told Boyd about the morning in 1985 when Travis hauled a snapped Caterpillar D8 dozer out of a wet pine plantation above Diboll and let the contractor pay him in 2 cords of seasoned post-oak firewood. He told stories about Roselle Mosley's pecan pie. The second year, they sandblasted the humidity-rusted frame down to clean steel. By the 5th year, the cab came off. In the 7th year, Walker slowed. He had a small heart attack in August and was at the Lufkin Memorial Hospital for 9 days. He came home thinner and quieter, but his hands still worked. He told Boyd the truck would wait. By the 9th year, the F-3 was a roller. In the 11th year, Boyd's son was born, and the work paused for a month. By the 14th year, Walker sat more than he stood. He worked from a folding wooden chair beside the pole barn wood stove. The battered straw western hat pulled low against the summer heat, the stubby corncob pipe between his teeth, pointing at what to do next. Through all those years, Sonny Pickett drove past the foot of Walker's gravel drive on US 59, sometimes in his polished black Lincoln Continental town car, with the Pickett Ford-Mercury silver decal on the side door, the gold rim aviators visible through the windshield. The Continental always slowed at the bottom of the drive but never quite turned in. By the 15th year, the F-3 was painted. They had wet sanded and primed and laid down a deep, glossy bayou green that matched a faded snapshot Walker had of the truck from 1977, and they had masked off the driver's door with blue painter's tape around a rectangle where the flaking pulpwood blaze orange junk paint still showed through, and they had left it there. Boyd did not know why. He just left it. By the 17th year, the small single-mast boom was rebuilt with a fresh aircraft-grade cable. By the 18th year, the F-3 was nearly whole. They had not yet replaced the rotted bed cross members and bolted fresh oak planks across the bed. The bed was the last thing on the list, because Walker always said you start with what makes the truck move and you finish with what carries her load. On a warm, clear morning of May the 12th of the 18th year, Boyd pulled into Walker's pole barn with a stack of fresh oak planks and a half-inch ratchet. He was 42. The dark brown at his temples had gone steady silver. The small white scar across his right knuckle from a creeperjack handle in 2014 was a faint line, and his hands had the thickness of a man who had spent half his life under hoods. Walker was 96. He sat on his folding wooden chair beside the pole barn wood stove with a heavy plaid cotton sheet over his knees against the May heat. The battered straw western hat pulled low, the stubby corncob pipe between his teeth. Boyd unbolted the rotted bed from the F-3 and lifted it free with a chain-fall hoist. He set the bed across 2 sawhorses at the back of the bay. He started to wire brush the steel cross members under the bed for fresh oak planks, and he stopped. The small steel pocket welded to the underside of the bed cross member between the spare tire mount and the rear axle was thicker than the surrounding steel, and the weld bead was hand-applied. Boyd set down the wire brush. He took a half-inch socket and unbolted the pocket from the cross member underside. The pocket came free in his hand. He carried the pocket to the workbench under the clip-on lamp and slit the soldered seam with a heated putty knife and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of waxed canvas bound with brown twine, were 4 things. There was a tight roll of folded $20 bills wrapped with a piece of brown twine, 70 bills in 1980s Federal Reserve paper, totaling $1,400. There was a small brass surveyor's transit tool case stamp with the engraved words Texas Highway Department/District 11, Surveyor/1933 across the brass face above 3 small initials. There was a small black and white photograph mounted on stiff paperboard showing a small girl of about 4 in a pale cotton sundress, standing on a Lufkin sawmill loading dock with stacked freshly cut yellow pine behind her. The date August 1986 written on the back in pencil. And there was a folded single sheet of plain yellowed lined paper, the creases brittle, the ink faded but legible. Boyd unfolded it. The handwriting was small and careful and slanted slightly to the right. The letter was dated May the 18th of 1990. It read, "To my Carolyn, the cash is for whatever a young woman needs at 18 when the piney woods cannot hold her. The stamp is your grandfather Henley's. He surveyed the Texas Highway Department District 11 roads through the piney woods from 1933 until he retired in 1958, and he gave the stamp to me on my 18th birthday in 1966. The photograph is of you, the morning your grandfather walked you down to the Lufkin sawmill to see the first fresh-cut yellow pine of the spring run. I am welding this pocket under the bed because the IP haul truck grade above the Angelina River has been wet for 3 weeks, and I do not want anything lost if a loaded truck slides on the next rescue. The truck is yours when you are old enough to drive her without breaking her. Your father, Travis Henley Mosley, Lufkin, Texas, May 18th, 1990. Boyd sat on the workbench. He read the letter twice. He handed it to his grandfather, and Walker held it in both hands and read it once and set it down. He said quietly, "Travis wrote this 6 days before the loaded IP haul truck slid on him at the river landing." The girl never knew. They drove east to Nacogdoches the next Saturday. Walker had called a Diboll sawmill hand whose niece kept the Nacogdoches farmers market office, and the niece had given them a current address for Caroline Mosley Hadley on a small honey and blueberry farm outside Nacogdoches. They drove east on State Highway 7 under a clear blue East Texas morning, past long rows of loblolly pine, and parked in front of a small clapboard farm office with a hand-painted wooden sign above the door reading Mosley, Hadley, Honey, and Blueberries. The woman who came out of the office in a faded khaki canvas farm apron was 42. She had Travis Mosley's broad shoulders and her father's deep, watery hazel eyes. She wore a faded khaki canvas farm apron over a faded pale blue cotton work shirt, faded dark blue dungarees, scuffed brown leather lace-up work boots, a small silver honeybee pendant on a thin silver chain at her throat, and a thin gold wedding band on her left ring finger. Walker spoke first. He said, "Ma'am, I knew your father. He worked on his F-3 in my pole barn in 1983. My grandson here bought the Ford at the Lufkin Estate Auction 18 years ago, and we have been restoring her ever since. And we found something welded under her bed that belongs to you." Caroline's face changed. She brought them into a small farm office kitchen, and they sat at a round oak table, and Boyd set the 4 items down one at a time. The cash first, then the brass stamp, then the photograph. He saved the letter for last. Caroline picked up the brass surveyor's stamp. She turned it slowly between her fingers and read the engraving on the brass face. She said her grandfather, Henley, had surveyed the Texas Highway Department District 11 Piney Woods roads from 1933 until 1958, that the family had been told the stamp had been sold to a Tyler antique dealer in 1962 after Henley died, and that she had been looking for it for 30 years. She picked up the photograph. She held it for a long time. She read the letter twice. She did not cry until the second reading. She asked finally if she could see the truck. They drove her north to Walker's pole barn the next morning. Caroline walked slowly around the F-3 3 times in the open bay. She ran her hand along the chrome Ford letters across the hood. She stood at the driver's door where the flaking pulpwood blaze orange junk was still masked off in blue tape. She turned to Boyd and she asked the price. Boyd looked at his grandfather. Walker laid both hands on his knees and said, "Ma'am, the truck is yours, but not the way you mean. We are going to finish her. We are going to paint over the door so the junk is gone, and then we are going to drive her down US 59 to Lufkin and park her at the empty board and batten lot where Mosley, East Texas Recovery stood until May of 1990, and we are going to paint your father's name on the door in a clean white the way he had it in 1976. The boy paid $300 at auction. The truck is his on the paper. The work is his by the doing. But the name on the door belongs to your father and your grandfather and you." They finished the F-3 through that summer. Carolyn drove west from her honey farm every other Sunday. On the morning of October the 15th of the 19th year, they rolled the F-3 out of Walker's pole barn under a clear blue East Texas sky and drove her in convoy south on US 59 to Lufkin and parked her facing the empty board and batten lot where Mosley, East Texas Recovery had stood until May of 1990. Boyd handed Caroline a small can of deep Bayou green paint and a 1-inch brush. Caroline climbed up on the running board and painted out the flaking pulpwood blaze orange junk on the driver's door. She waited an hour. She opened a can of clean white lettering paint, and in her father's careful slant, she painted across the door, in clean, clear letters, Mosley, East Texas Recovery, established 1976, old enough to drive her without breaking her. She stepped down. A polished black Lincoln Continental town car went by on US 59. Sonny Pickett was driving. He slowed almost to a stop. He looked at the F-3 at the empty board and batten lot with the Bayou green door and the clean white lettering. He looked at the 4 people on the gravel. He did not laugh. He drove on. The F-3 sits on US 59 in Lufkin today, and the sign on the door reads, Mosley, East Texas Recovery, established 1976. Caroline runs the honey and blueberry farm outside Nacogdoches. The $1,400 sits in a small lockbox at her farm office. The 1933 Texas Highway Department surveyor's stamp sits beside it. The 1986 photograph is framed above her kitchen table. The letter is in a small fireproof safe in her closet. She reads it once a year on the 18th of May. If you ever see an old Ford F-3 parked along US 59 in Lufkin, with the words Mosley, East Texas Recovery painted on the door in clean white, slow down, roll the window down, and listen. There is a story in that truck that a Ford dealer in a white Western sport coat would have hauled to the Diboll scrapyard for the cost of the diesel and the work was always for the daughter. Subscribe to Iron Hook Stories for a new story every day. Thank you for watching.